I've been thinking quite a bit lately about something we can all relate to, something that is unquestionably, inescapably American. I am referring, of course, to our great national pastime, baseball. Or so it had been. That's right, America. Before we were devastated by atomic war, each state had its own professional baseball team. Imagine a perfect, cloudless day. The sun is warm and welcoming, and on the horizon they appear like knights of yore, armed with bats of ash and hickory. Their purpose? To make you, dear America, revel in the joys of sport and sunshine, if only for an afternoon.
While there were many baseball teams before the war, there's only one with a real legacy. Fenway Park, Boston's legendary stadium, was home to the Swatting Sultans, who won the World Series several times over the years, although the last time was in 1918, almost 160 years ago, and it was on October 23, 2077, where they were set to play the 7th game of the World Series against a formerly unbeatable team from Texas. Yet the Sultans were starting with a 3-point lead, and people were beginning to believe the Sultans were finally going to bring victory to Boston. But the Great War had other ideas, and the game was never played. It was a clear day when it all started. One of their players, Nathan Broadhurst, showed up to the stadium early, along with Jim Walker and Matt Murtagh. Now, Matt had been worried sick about the game because he was first up to pitch. There was a lot of tension in the air. If they did win, it would make history, and the curse would at long last be broken. And so, Nathan and Jim helped Matt warm up. Nathan was stepping up to bat when he felt everything shake. At first, the trio assumed it was an earthquake, but then came a terrible sound, like reality ripping itself apart. A burst of heat raced overhead, and the chairs in the outfield melted before their eyes. If not for the stadium's large walls, they would have all died in the devastation. Once the shaking stopped, thoughts turned to their families, and Matt was the first to leave. He said goodbye, wished the others luck with their own search, and left for Atlanta, unaware that this would be the last time the three of them would speak. Nathan and Jim had no idea if Matt made it to Atlanta in one piece, though what they did know was that they needed to get home. However, there were hundreds of miles of death and destruction standing between them and Charleston, West Virginia, where Janice Walker, Jim's sister and Nathan's fiancée, would be waiting. There was no time to waste. They gathered up some food, took their bats, and started walking. Initially, Nathan and Jim were going to take a more coastal route, but they heard from other survivors that New York was even worse off than Boston, so they ended up going inland, taking Highway 90 onto 84. It was during this diversion, a few days after being on the road, where they joined a friendly group in Hartford, Connecticut. The group was heading to Pittsburgh to find their own families. Not a great idea considering how the city turned out, but they didn't know. And luckily, Nathan and Jim parted ways with the group shortly after reaching Altoona. For a couple of days, they didn't see much of anything. No survivors, no signs of life, and I wish I could say it remained that way, for Nathan and Jim later encountered another group, this time further south, in a small town called Bedford, and the people living here were anything but friendly. The survivors had already walled themselves in, were gathering resources for the tough times ahead, and they didn't take too kindly to two strangers passing through their town. Even though the players were armed with bats, good enough for fighting off stray dogs, they were no match when it came to firearms. As they were passing the settlement, the gate opened and a gang of men stormed out on bikes. While Nathan and Jim were athletic, running away was out of the question, although they did try, but the gang ran them down, tied them up, and locked them inside of an old bank. We don't know why the men left them alive, nor will we find out, because the players managed to undo their bindings, collect their bats, and make it to the roof. But that was their biggest mistake. Nathan jumped from the bank's roof to the one beside it without any trouble. But his movements must have drawn the attention of the gang, and the very moment Jim tried jumping across, he was dead before he hit the ground, and the gang was on their way to the roof, leaving Nathan with no other choice but to leave his best friend's body behind and sneak away. It took Nathan another week to make it to Charleston, and when he arrived, he found a small camp of survivors trying to make the best of a bad situation. Unlike those in Bedford, these people were friendly, and after watching them from a safe distance, Nathan decided it was safe to approach. The survivors here were indeed friendly, and better yet, they knew both him and his fiancée, but they couldn't help Nathan. They hadn't seen or heard from Janice in weeks. Discouraged but determined, Nathan continued searching for Janice for several months, and every time he pursued new leads, like a woman resembling his fiancée or a new group of settlers coming to the area, he found no trace of her. It was as if Janice had simply disappeared. For all Nathan knew, he'd passed her on his way to Appalachia. Maybe she'd headed for Boston to find him, or maybe she'd died in the blast. In any case, he continued searching, though in the end, he never saw her again. For some time, Nathan continued living alone, watching the world go by, and wondering if his friend Matt had more luck finding his family than he did. Impossible to know, but I like to think he did. And this could have been the end of Nathan's story, if not for a group of bright-eyed settlers focused not just on surviving, but rebuilding. They were the nicest folk he had encountered since the world burned, and together they built a new home on the cliffs halfway between Vault 76 and Anchor Farm, now called Settlers Ridge, a place Nathan would call home for the rest of his life, slowly turning from a famous baseball player into a lonely but content old man. And a small part of me believes Nathan helped the settlers rebuild in the hopes word would spread that there was a better place to call home, and maybe Janice would hear the stories and come here, a fanciful dream and nothing more. And this is the end of Nathan's story, kind of, as he did write an autobiography before he died, detailing how he survived the Great War and joined the settlers, the anticipation of winning the World Series, the initial blast, and the long walk to Appalachia, everything. And once he passed away, both his notes and bats were put on display, showing survivors and travelers alike that life does get better, to not give up, and to always have hope. We don't know what year Nathan wrote this, but as of 2103, Nathan is gone, but the legacy of his team lives on. In the years that followed the Great War, Fenway Park became its very own settlement, Diamond City, with its monstrous green walls still keeping the residents safe. It has its own mayor, police force, markets, and private housing, an amazing thing to achieve in the post-war world. But this was only possible due to the people who survived and stayed put. And now, in 2287, on the very field the Swatting Sultans used to play, is a little store called Swatters, where Mo Cronin sells all manner of baseball items. While the equipment hasn't changed, people's understanding of their use has, and baseball as a sport has taken on an entirely new meaning.
A swatter, my friend, is a Diamond City tradition. See, it used to be that this whole place was a stadium, and two teams would meet and play a game called baseball. One team would beat the other team to death with these things called baseball bats, and the best bats were called swatters. This baseball, it's the real deal. You'd sign one of these and give it to the children of anyone you killed on the field. Look at that card. See those numbers on the back? Tracks the count of enemies beaten to death by the player. Check out the leather on that mitt. Really good players use them to catch bullets. True fact there.
Of course, with the sole survivor having lived in the past, they can tell Mo how the game used to be played. Although he much prefers his version, and in a way, that is what the survivors became. Fighters, using their bats to swing their way to victory. While the mitts couldn't catch bullets, and baseballs weren't given to players' children upon their death, Nathan did pass down his bat to the next generation, giving them hope. And the walls that saved him on that terrible day are still standing, still keeping people safe, So while the Swatting Sultans didn't win the World Series, they did win in other ways.